Okay, so here is my first video to do with Revit making the leap. I just want to go through this one, the specific question you'll be faced with, whether to go for Revit LT or full Revit. So let's get into it. There's a little bit, just want to tell you, these are my contact details here. All these videos will be available on YouTube and potentially downloadable from my main website when that's redone. That's currently in the works now. So just a little bit more about myself. I am a freelancer. I first did an intro into Revit myself when I was employed in 2013. Subsequently from there I went freelance, but didn't really start using Revit on any sort of projects until 2017. This was mainly due to the clients really required me to have for them to have AutoCAD drawings. Since then I've been using a multiple range of softwares, but on certain types of projects with certain clients I have been using Revit, and finding out all the great things and bad things that you would come across when you start using the software. One thing I just want to point out very clearly is I use Revit mainly on bespoke housing projects, so not necessarily every project is the same. I feel there's a common misconception out there that Revit saves you massive amounts of time. I have found this not necessarily to be true with bespoke projects, because you are always modelling something for new on that project, rather than if some commercial projects or schools and those sorts of things, you'll pretty much have the similar type of windows in terms of design openings, whereas if you're using bespoke one-off housing, that's not necessarily the case, especially if you're going for some sort of paragraph 79 sort of project, where you've got sweeping windows. So I just want to make that very, very clear. Yes, there is some time saving in the scheme design stages and planning, but when it comes to doing the detailing, if everything's bespoke, I've not really seen any time savings between Revit and AutoCAD, because essentially you are just basically doing the detail for the first time, and maybe never using it again. So that's just something to be wholly aware of. I think that gets forgotten in all of the BIM and Revit hype. Okay, so the first question you are going to be posed with is which one. So we're going to hop over now to the AutoDesk comparison website list of features here. Now, I think the first thing that you're going to be hit with, and especially if you're rolling this out amongst a number of people, is whether to go for Revit LT or for Revit. Now, if you are a practice which doesn't really do a lot of building information modelling, you may be asking yourself, what's the point entirely? I personally don't do any BIM projects on Revit. I still use it for architectural working drawings, and so the BIM process really doesn't enter what I am currently doing, but I still use Revit for about 50% of the stuff that I do. So it's definitely still a tool you can use working drawings. You can use it for working drawings, and I do feel you will get a huge benefit out of using it. Even if it's for one thing, just graphically, once you know how to use the software graphically, you can do lots and lots with it, and very quickly as well. Okay, so the first thing you're going to get hit with is this pricing. Now, this is going to be more expensive going direct than it is to one of the software vendors in the UK. So obviously you need to have that to and fro with them. I always do every year. It's always very interesting to see how much you can save. Okay, so let's get into the list, and then I think you can really make a decision from there. I mean, ultimately, you do have free trials to test, but you know, in all honesty, you're not going to be using this on your first project, which is you are getting paid for by a client. It's just a fantasy, really, that you would do that, because the amount of things that you need to do implementation wise, it's not feasible to do it on something which is which you need to get out and deliver for a client. That may be a controversial viewpoint, but from my experience, I would do this on a test project and spend some time with it. And you know, if you have it time to do that within the first 30 days, then great. I would possibly recommend that you do it annually to start with, monthly, so you just have an understanding of where the issues lie in terms of your implementation rather than using the software. I can't hit that home hard enough. Is the implementation of this product is like nothing else you would have used before. Okay, so let's get into the features. Deployment is pretty straightforward. It's very self-explanatory. Standard installation for REVIT LT. You know, you don't get the networking deployment to filter it across a number of machines. I have LT on 2 machines, but obviously you can only use 1 machine at a time. And obviously, as it's me, that's not going to be a problem. Architecture modelling, you still have all the features that you do have in REVIT LT. Now, this is one of the things the vendors will not tell you about this, is that, you know, they will show you this list, but they won't show you the detail in each list. So the one that I want to highlight to you specifically is the roofs. Now, if you are doing basic Victorian style architecture housing, very much like this, I know a lot of this is American and I am from the UK, so I am just going to be looking at this from a UK point of view. I just want to highlight the problem you will have using REVIT LT. This type of roof, not a problem. Again, this one, not a problem. That one, not a problem. Doing all of this, not a problem. Where will you have the issues? This type of roof here and this type of roof here. It's not circular, so you're not gonna. It's not that I'm saying is the issue. It's these pitches going up to one point. You will struggle to do that in REVIT LT. You have the functionality in full Revit to drag a point up, and from that you can put in the center and pull and extrude up like you could in SketchUp. You do not have that facility in REVIT LT, so that's just something to be really aware of. The other thing that I just want to highlight from this design, even though it's American, is this flat roof or this pitched roof here. You could do that in REVIT LT, but if you want to do it as a flat roof scenario and show the taper for rainwater runoff, again, you could not do that in REVIT LT. You would have to then do what they've pretty much done here, is model it as a pitched roof and then find a workaround in terms of generic modelling, and that's how I've done it. Again, reiterating, this is not a BIM compliant standpoint, so I just want to make that doubly clear again. I'd just like to also add at this point as well, if there is any comments that you like to put in, additions, or if you feel that I've got something wrong, let's have a discussion about it in the comments below. Because I really do use this software to as far as I've been able to its fullest potential. But if you think there's something that I may have wrong, if you're a Revit Power user, please let me know. Okay, so then you have design options and X, Y, and Z, and those are pretty much the same. I haven't found on all of these site modelling side of things, unless you are doing conceptual mass modelling, which we'll cover a little bit later down this list. That's all the same. Construction modelling, assemblies. This is basically when you want to group something together and schedule it. From a work and drawings point of perspective, I have not come across this for doing a building regulations project where I've needed that. When it comes to parts, again, not wholly required for building regulations approval type documents, but what that is basically you can what's sort of like exploding a wall type, a roof type, and basically drag the individual layers of that roof makeup back, and it does look pretty cool, but really, is it required for your day-to-day usage? I think not. Structural modelling. Now, I do a lot of modelling of portal frame buildings for Class Q conversions under permitted development, and that's an agricultural building which is then going for C3 as a dwelling house type conversion. So in here you can see slanted columns, trusses, advanced steel connections, and from an architectural perspective you will not need these. You can model things generically that don't have any parameters or speciality types, so you can do a generic model of a truss and then repeat that. It's obviously not the quickest route to do it, but if you're just doing a section through a standard building, then you could just draw the lines in to indicate a truss, or just leave it to the manufacturer. MEP modelling. Now, obviously, you can import all kinds of components, or if it was AutoCAD blocks, into your model. So you ain't got to worry about, I'm not going to be able to import a toilet, shower, bath, X, Y, and Z, those sorts of things. This stuff is really down to the pipes, the connections, those sorts of things. So again, from an architectural point of view, not required. Advanced modelling. So this is the question that I said about, or highlighted about, the roofs. I don't know why that this wasn't put in up there, because I don't really call that advanced modelling, but some people do. In place modelling, you can do that for walls only. We'll go over that in later tutorials. Global parameters, and this is assigning certain parameters to that element. Conceptual massing. Now this is to do with just massing model exercises. Personally, you could use AutoDesk Format for this operation, or I would tend to just use SketchUp. It's just SketchUp is a bit more free thinking than Revit. It's not going to come up with any warnings or anything like that. So I think from a massing point of view, it's I would just use SketchUp rather than REVIT LT. But that's just my personal preference. Autodesk have this whole workflow where you could use AutoDesk Format, model it there, and then export it and import it into full Revit. You can't do that in Revit LT. That's just one of the limitations, but if you want to conceptual mass in SketchUp, you can import a SketchUp model into REVIT LT. Just a word of caution there is that it will not carry over any textures, and is essentially a linked model which you cannot manipulate in REVIT LT. Okay, moving down the list. Presentation wise, in terms of all of this list here, I've found no issues between the two, or any limitations I should say between the two. It all looks really pretty good when you're using it. In product rendering, now if you've got a massive model anyway, what happens here is that with REVIT LT you send it to the cloud for it to be rendered, rather than you can render it locally on your own machine. Now there is the question of why you would actually want to do that, rendering it locally, because it's obviously going to eat up resources. So I don't see this as a negative. Decals is basically JPEGs that you put in. I'm sure there's some other fancy way people are using them, but if you want to put a JPEG on a wall face, you can still do that you can still import a JPEG into Revit, and I don't understand why that they have added that in there. And then you've got ray trace rendering, so when you're moving around it can re-render, but again you could just use SketchUp for that. And from my perspective, the cost difference is massive, and you can buy a standalone perpetual license of SketchUp and a perpetual license of a add-on renderer for the cost of 1 year of using full Revit. So I think that's just one thing to certainly look at in terms of your options. I've gone through these options and just thought, from a value point of view, this I just think is not really required for your day-to-day usage. Analysis tools, for insurance purposes, I question why you would even, from an architectural point of view, actually have any of this anyway. I just think it opens yourself up to some very serious issues, especially solar studies, massing studies. Okay, you can just do all of these in SketchUp anyway with free plugins. 2D documentation. So this is where obviously you're going to be doing a lot of your building regulation detailing. Yes, to let you know, you still detail in 2D in Revit. We will go over that in later videos, but I just want to make that clear. That's been a common misconception which I have and which people still have today. Revision tracking, this is all good, that's all brilliant and very quick. Dimension tagging, dimensioning is a lot easier in Revit and a lot quicker, it's brilliant. Phasing, also a very good thing to do, and materials and takes-offs. All of these schedules, panel filters, view filters, okay, you could come across where you may need that, but I tend to get around that and have had very little use for that in my day-to-day working life. Graphical column schedules, okay, do you really need that from an architectural perspective? Not really. So collaboration, this is where if you are using if you're on a very big project where you may require full Revit. Interface checking, so that's clash detection. Work sharing, okay, so what that basically means is that two people or more can work on one Revit file at the same time. So if you've got a big project like a hotel or something like that, someone can work on the windows levels and those sorts of things. So it's just one thing to consider. But if you're like me and you're doing standalone bespoke housing, then there are ways around it where you could have like a master model and then use your 2D details for in a separate file, which is then linked into the master file, similar to XREFing. All of these things are possible, and there are, I feel, legitimate workarounds for this. Shared coordinates among projects, that's obviously an obvious one. And then the Revit server as well. I mean, that I have not had an issue, and I don't use it in the format that it is required for, so it's just not needed. But I mean, it's worth having a look at the Revit server, because it does have some benefits. But from a one-off project, I have not seen that quite just yet. This is all fairly straightforward. Open and linking files like you would. Custom visibility of linked models. Again, if you are using this as a BIM project, then definitely you would need to have full Revit, so you can link in the different models and show, I don't know, the structural model as grey or as red or whatever. So that is just something to consider. Links and imports of other formats. So the standard list of things, and if you do have SketchUp as well, you can convert it into a bunch of all of these things anyway. So if you've got an FBX file that you want to turn into, that you want to import into SketchUp, then you can do that. Save it as SketchUp, import it into Revit LT. The other way around, if you do want to get something into full Revit, then and keep the materials, then you can use AutoDesk format, and then use an add-on in full Revit to then carry the materials across as well. Okay, so the one thing that I just want to highlight here, which I am now starting to move into, is point cloud scanning with drones. So there is going to be a specific case where I may need to make the jump to full Revit, because the outputs from drone scanning, which is in point clouds, I can import the files into SketchUp and then make it into an OBJ and then import it into Revit that way. It can be, but then, like I said, all the materials do not come across. It is basically a dark coloured file, and it is just not what you're looking for. Okay, so exports are pretty good on here. It's just you cannot export family types and those sorts of things as well, like the library types as well. So that's just one thing that I would just do some Google searches just to understand exactly what those are. I don't want to go in detail here because I'm aware we're at sort of 25-minute mark nearly. Okay, so this is one of the things that that has been fairly annoying to me, and that is third-party API add-ins. Now this is where you will have, if you use MBS for your software, you can get MBS Create, which you can drag in from the National BIM library, all sorts of things, tag it, call out and clauses, and then build your schedule of works from there. You cannot do that in Revit LT. So that is just one thing to be very aware of. Macros, obviously shortcuts, and then Revit Dynamo. So if you don't know what Dynamo is, it's not an essential tool, but it is a very quick time-saving tool, as well as if you're doing high-level conceptual mass modeling. So I've just sort of looked at these here as well. You can do it in Revit, but this stuff is all sort of really using Dynamo is going to get you this a lot quicker. These sorts of things. Just one other thing for Dynamo, more on a small scale than those sort of fancy things I showed you. Say if you have a set of 30 columns and you want to rotate all the columns on their own axis by 45 degrees, then you'd have to do it individually 30 times, whereas in Dynamo you can write a script and then apply it to them, and then it will do all of those 30 rotated in one quick go. So just on a small scale, Revit Dynamo can save you so much time on top of what you're doing day to day as well. So that's it for sort of from, I know that's a bit more of a detailed list, but I really felt that is needed to understand a bit more about where I'm coming from and using the software, and sort of the issues where I think, oh, I wish I had full Revit for this. But really, on a day-to-day basis, I'm getting away perfectly fine with using REVIT LT. So it's entirely up to you, really, whether you think what I've discussed is worth adding the extra onto your annual or monthly subscription fee. So I'm just going to quickly go again just through here. So parts, I've never really, although cool, had any issues with it. Trusses, maybe, but you can get around it by a generic model. You just can't schedule it unless you tag it a certain way. MEP stuff, not going to need it in an architectural perspective. Slanted and edited roofs. Okay, so this one, as I said before, you will struggle to model that in Revit LT, no doubt about it. So that's where that could be a deal breaker for you. It nearly is a deal breaker for me. Conceptual mass modeling and adaptive components, again, I would use SketchUp for that. It's just so much easier, just so much more straightforward, so much more of a free thinking tool. In product rendering, I wouldn't do that if I was you. Decals, no point really. Analysis tools, solar studies and massing studies, you can do it in SketchUp. I just don't see the issues with that. If it comes to you want to be able to show shadows, you can geolocate the model and then do the sun tracing over a day. Those sorts of things can still be easily done in Revit LT. That one is just, as far as I understand it, yes, so there you go, only still images available from solar study. But I think you can, from memory, you can do a whole sort of animation of the sun path going across. But really, you can do the same in SketchUp, a lot quicker and a lot easier. Never come across when I've needed any of that day to day. Because I work on my own, I've never really come across any of this day to day. This as well, I've never really come across this being an issue. You can still copy and paste elements from other projects. I don't know why that they've put that in there, or maybe someone can highlight me a bit more of where you would actually need that. Point clouds, importing stuff. Yes, that is now becoming a bit of an issue for me, and so I will possibly be looking to upgrade in the coming months, just because of what I am doing now with drones and point cloud scanning. Yes, I've had some issues with this third-party add-ons API plugins. Like I tried to get a timber frame modeling add-in, obviously can't do that. And then Dynamo as well. Okay, so I just wanted to wrap up that sort of first question on which one. There will be some more videos in terms of implementation and other issues that you just need to think about before you dig go full on into Revit really. It's just one of those things that I think you need to be aware of, because what I wouldn't want to happen is you to then buy the software like I did and think, it does absolutely everything, I can do absolutely everything now. That is just still not the case. There is a level of implementation, as I said at the start, that you need to look at before you start using this on a live project.